Morning. The pews are like this because we want to give you an idea of what they would look like. This is kind of what we're leaning toward configuration-wise for the building. And Adam and Dietrich came in and turned these so people could get a look and either approve or reject the idea, and voice your opinion. And if you really are violently opposed, you can complain to Adam. Adam, where are you? Oh yeah. So anyway, maybe you could talk to me about it and share your ideas on that. But the hope is to kind of pull things to the center and feel a little more like a community, I guess, when we're sitting here. Small little tweak, but like I said, if you have an idea on that, go ahead and share it. This is a historic Sunday for us. I am about to come up on my 4-year anniversary of speaking in front of you on most Sundays, and I don't think I've given a message on giving. So this is the first one, and there's several reasons for that. Number one, I really don't give a whole lot of messages on a whole lot of specific things because I just like to talk about passages of the Bible as they come up. I trust that the Bible can address our lives and it will address them holistically. And so giving is just one of many things that are part of living a life for God. Another reason is that people are uncomfortable about this topic. Let's just be honest with ourselves that there's something just kind of grates on us at times when we talk about the idea of giving away our money. And in our culture, oftentimes Christians and churches have been seen as those who are trying to get other people's money. It's just like, well, I don't want to go there. And there's so many appeals for money, all these parachurch ministries, churches, and others. Some churches have a whole separate, just like we have a communion meditation, they'll have a whole separate meditation on giving every Sunday. And so that can get a little old. So there's some reasons that we don't talk so much about giving. We're just assuming that for people. But it seemed that at this time it was a good time to discuss it. And it is a powerful thing because Jesus did talk about money. He talked about it more than any other single subject. And I think it's because money can tend to have a power over our lives. And Jesus wanted us as those who are part of his kingdom to be free of that power that money can have over us. And so we're going to talk about that today. And as we get into that, I just want to get out of the way real quick. I want to express to you the percentage that you are obligated to give to this church. So the percentage of your income that you are obligated to give to this church sits right around that. Okay? So just so we can get that out of the way, that it's not about obligation. It's not about commands. As a matter of fact, the percentage of your income that God needs from you is roughly the same amount. So that's the thing. I just want to get out of the way as we begin this conversation, is that it's not about a particular dollar figure or a percentage of your income. It's not about something you owe, a particular amount that's going to make you more spiritual, more accepted. As a matter of fact, I have no idea who gives what here. And I like it that way. And that's a great thing. And it's not really about that. It's about our love for the Lord and the lives that flow out of that. But that being said, the Bible does talk about it. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9, we're going to kind of cover that. And I'm going to give you the big overview. I'm going to tell you where we're going this morning. I'm going to give you kind of a long sentence. And this long sentence is going to serve as our outline, and it's going to be the summary of 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, at least as I see it. And the sentence goes like this: become rich in grace through shrewd investment of Christ's wealth as it multiplies to bring a return for God's glory. That's a mouthful. But it is 2 chapters in one sentence, so give me a break. Right? So let's just take this sentence one little phrase at a time. And the first thing we're going to talk about is this idea of becoming rich in grace. If you have a Bible, you want to follow along, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. we're going to start with this idea of grace. We think of grace as something that is present in the mind and heart of God, something that exists in heaven. But that's kind of a small view of grace. It's limited. Grace is actually a much broader concept, and I think that at least one aspect of it, the one way we can view grace is that grace is the currency of the kingdom. That grace is the stuff that it merits praise, that it has value in the kingdom economy. And so as we talk about it, we're going to talk about it almost as if it were money. And one of the things about money is that it has to have some distinctives. And just like a coin, if you were to grab a quarter and pull it out of your pocket, and I know in recent years, quarters have had a bit more diversity than they used to have in the 70s, 80s. But starting in the 90s, they began to have a bit more diversity, but they still have to have some basic things on them, right? Or it's not a word. It's just play money. And it's the same in the first century, that if you were to have some sort of a coin, it needed to have an inscription and an image on it, just as Jesus in the story when the Pharisees come to him and he says, give me a denarii, and he says, whose image and inscription are on that. And so grace is observable. In Acts, in a couple of places, we see that someone would go and visit a church, and they would say there was so much grace there with it that they saw it. And it says that when Barnabas got to Antioch, he saw the grace of God and was glad. And so there are distinctives that we can visit a group of people, and on a very brief interaction, we can recognize grace among them. That it's observable. It's not some secret, private thing that happens in our hearts. No one told me I'm wearing little girl sunglasses. Huh? You tried. Thank you, hon. You're always taking care of me. I need to pay more attention to you. Huh? It's grace. Thank you. But here are the inscriptions of grace, as in Corinthians 8, beginning verse 1. It says, and now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonians. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. So one of the things about grace is it's otherworldly, that it seems to flow not from someone's circumstances, not from the fact that, well, I got a bunch of extra cash laying around, I might as well give you some of it. But this idea that people, even people who are poor, are somehow inspired to give. That somehow in the midst of hard situations and scarcity, that there's this sense of joy, there's a sense of abundance, this intangible abundance that's flowing out. And we say, well, where is that coming from? That we can't look around and say, this is coming from a physical, earthly source. It's coming from somewhere else. And so that's the first thing I want to observe about grace. The second thing I want to observe about it is it's self-motivated. That grace is like what Jesus said about the Holy Spirit, is this well of living water springing up from within the individual. And so it says that entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. So there's this thing that, you don't have to, it's not like pulling teeth. It's people who are glad to share and to give. You see, grace is in operation when there's this motivation that's flowing from within. The next thing I want to notice is it's abundant. It's not asking, how much is this going to cost me? It's not asking, when have I given enough? It's saying, you know what? Take that and here's some more. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God, also to us. I believe Paul here is referring to a gift that they gave to him personally that was really the occasion of the Philippian letter. As Paul says, I've received the gift that you've given me, and now I am praising God for what you gave me. And so Paul's saying, I'm asking you to give to the poor saints in Jerusalem. And the Philippians said, yes, Paul, we want to give. And by the way, here's some for you. And so there was this desire to go above and beyond. That's what, when you see grace in operation, that these are some hallmarks to show you that grace is there in a person. It's there in a community. You can recognize it, And it's not anywhere else but where the gospel has taken root. So that's the first thing, is that we're supposed to become rich in grace, right? And this is how we know we have our pockets full of grace if we're like this. If our hearts are inscribed with these particular traits, we're becoming rich in grace. Well, how do we get there? We're going to get there together. How are we going to become rich in grace? Together we can. Now, just because the grace has an otherworldly source doesn't mean that being rich in grace is completely outside of our control or our cooperation. That we have to submit to it. We have to participate in it in order to be rich in grace. And so in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 6 to 7, Paul says to the Corinthians, he says, so we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. He says, I want to show you this grace that the Macedonians have. Now I sent Titus to reproduce this in you. Okay? And then he says, but since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. So there's some things I want to notice. First of all, it's something that was a choice for them. He's saying, guess what, guys? You have been given all of the products of grace. You've been given this excellent speech. You've been given greater faith. You've been given knowledge. You've been given earnestness, that this is all examples of grace working itself out into your life. And he's saying, complete your portfolio. You know, it's not just that I'm smarter than I was. It's not just that I'm wiser than I was. It's not just that I'm more sincere than I was. He's saying you also need to be more generous. And sometimes people are like, well, I like the rest of the gifts, but that one's not as much fun. And so the implication here is this is a choice. You have to accept this. You need to submit to it. Another thing is that there's accountability. He says, I sent Titus to complete this in you, that we can put tension on each other. And I think that we should, you know, that we should know each other well enough. That's what this talk is, that we should say, hey, we need to give. You need to give. You need to be more generous. And that we can say there's a need here, that there's constant tension in the body where someone's bringing a need before the believers with the trust that that need is going to be met. And that's what Titus's job was. And the last thing is that Paul says, you know, he's just encouraging them. He's urging them, excel in this grace of giving. So that's the first phrase, that we can become rich in grace. How are we going to do that? A little further, it says through shrewd investment of Christ's wealth. Well, when you want to return on something, you have to invest that on which you want the return, right? So if I want more money, I'm going to have to invest what? Money, right? If I want more grace, more of Christ's wealth, I'm going to have to invest more grace. It's his wealth, not the world's wealth. And so reading on in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 8 through 9, he says this, I am not commanding you. Remember at the beginning when I showed you how much you are obligated? I am not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. I'm going to stop right there. In the first century world, coins were distinctive, but they weren't so distinctive that you couldn't counterfeit them. That someone with some decent skills could actually counterfeit the coins. And so what you would do, the coins themselves were not worth anything, you know. So for instance, if I get $1 out of my pocket, you know, how much is this paper worth? Right? This paper, as paper, is not worth any more than a $1, even though this is a $10 bill. It's only worth $10 because it's got these watermarks and these pictures and stuff, right? In the Roman world, they didn't have such a thing. What was printed on there didn't mean anything. It wasn't worth what was printed on it. It was worth what it was worth in gold. And so if I were to take some brass and mix it 50-50 with some gold, and then stamp out some coins, write Caesar Augustus on it, and go spend it out there in the world, I've just given myself a 50% discount on everything, right? So what we had to do is if you give me 10 gold coins, I'm going to have to put it on a scale. And I'm going to have to set another 10 gold coins that I know are gold so that I can determine whether this is actually worth 10 gold coins. Saying here is he's saying, you know, you've got this love that Christ has put in your hearts through faith in his gospel. But is your love at the purity level? Is it 100% enough that it's going to actually do something? Is it sincere? Is it authentic? Is it genuine? And the way Paul's doing that is he's saying, well, here's the Macedonian grace. Here's the response of love in their lives. I'm going to put it on this side of the scale. And here's what I'm asking you, Corinthians, is to take your love and stick it over here. And so that the authenticity of your love, because, you know, love is only as good as what it does, right? I mean, I could look you in the eye and say, I just love you. I love you so much. Can't really stand how much I love you. You're like, hey, can you help me move this weekend? No, absolutely not. See, the authenticity of love is measured in giving and in doing, right? It's what Amy Carmichael said. You can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. And what matters in the kingdom is love. And so it's Christ's wealth that we're supposed to invest. And he says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. Here's the thing. As a Christian, you say, well, you know, I've got some grace, and I'm pretty good with just subsistence grace. If I can have enough grace to just get me into heaven, I think that will be enough, right? If I could just live in a shack next to the railroad track, I'll be satisfied, right? And that if I can maybe live in a mansion here and have lots of goods and stuff, and then also make it to heaven in a shack next to the railroad track of heaven, I'll be happy. But you don't get that option. I don't get that option. Why is that? Because Jesus died. He gave up his own standing. He cashed in his personal righteousness so that I could be rich. Not so that I could live in a shack next to the railroad tracks. You see, if I were to sell everything I had, and I were to cash it all in, and I were to live as a homeless man so that you could go to college, so that you could make something of yourself, and you said, hey, thanks, I blew it all, and now I'm going to live in a shack. You see how offensive that would be? That Jesus gave it all up, not so that I could just skate into heaven, not just so that I could be a nominal Christian, but so that I could be stinking, filthy rich in his grace. What do we owe to him? It's not enough to do just enough. We ought to be hungry. We ought to be greedy for grace, folks, because he paid a big price. So shrewd investment. Here's what Paul says. Remember, he said in verse 8, I'm not commanding you. Here's what I'm doing. He says, and here is my judgment about what is best for you. The Greek there means what is profitable. He says, I want to tell you how you can get a better return on your investment. On you all the time. Right? Nobody's like, now, James, you need to try to do what's going to make profit in your business. He knows that. He doesn't need a law for that. And we don't either if we understand the nature of reality. He says this, I want to tell you what's best for you. Last year, you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it, according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. First thing I want to notice, it's best for you. Remember what he said in the Corinthian letter? He said this, I have the right to do anything, not laying obligation on you, not commanding you anything. But you say, but not everything is profitable. If I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. You see, he's presuming that we want to advance in the gospel. He said, I can trust you. I don't have to stay with you. I don't have to give you prohibitions because I'm assuming you want to become like Jesus. You want to grow. You want in grace. And so that's the thing. That's the motivation. What's best to you. So what should we invest? This. It has to be actual stuff with a willing heart. A willing heart without stuff is counterfeit money, right? Stuff without a willing heart is the same. That when we go to God's investment website and we want to invest these riches, we want to multiply them, we're going to have to enter both our username and our PIN, and they're going to have to match. And so the username, let's call it the gift, and the PIN, let's call it the sincere heart of love and generosity. And those both have to be there because this word down here, acceptable. And so when we punch in a generous gift given from an eager heart, what we see on Christ's website is transaction successful. It came through. Because this is what Paul said in the 1 Corinthian letter, and if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender to my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. You see, the fact that we're called to give doesn't mean we're called to solve the world's problems. It doesn't mean that we're called to be Jesus. It means that we're called to grow in our love and to become like Jesus because we need to give. God doesn't need our money. And that's when it's profitable. Well, one more thing on this. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 13 through 15, it says this, our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard-pressed, but that there might be equality. At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn, their plenty will supply what you need. The goal is equality. As it is written, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. You see, when grace is in operation, what we get is a society that learns equality. In Acts chapter 4, it says this, all the believers were one heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continue to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. You say, well, that sounds like communism. It's not communism. It's the opposite of communism, because communism means I take John's stuff and I give it to Wayne. That's communism. Communism is compulsory. Communism is controlling. This is communism. That we are one. That if you're hurting, I'm hurting. You ever drive any nails? You ever smash your thumb? When you smash your thumb, you go, well, at least I got 4 fingers that aren't hurt. Right? You see, there ought to be something in us that cannot rest, that cannot be at peace when one member of the body is hurting. There ought to be something about us that goes, oh! Right? If there's not, then maybe we're not fully connected. That there's this longing to see a fix. Here's another thing about equality. I'm going to get real personal here. For the past 4 years, we generally give around 10% to kingdom causes and to needs of people we know. That's not a brag. I wish it were more. But we haven't always given into that box. One of those reasons has been because I believe that it's always our responsibility as individual Christians to give that money according to as God has led us. That we can't abdicate it to the leadership. We're responsible for where it goes and what it brings. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is it just seems so weird to me to give money and then have them pay me a check. It's kind of like I felt like I was taking money out of my wallet and going and putting it in this pocket. And so I didn't do it that much. But then it dawned on me that what I was doing, because this building and these grounds, this electricity, the pews, everything here costs money, that what I was doing was a lot like if we were in a supper club and we were all sitting down to eat and we all said, man, that was good. And then I was like, well, see y'all, and left. That I was saying, you know what, the rest of you can pick up the check. I've got other places to spend my money. There needs to be equality in a sense of ownership. That we're really not together. We're not partners with each other if we don't all feel some obligation to shoulder the load. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to pay for lunch. Sometimes you don't have the money for lunch, and the rest of us should be glad to cover you. We should be tickled to death for the opportunity. But if later that week we see you somewhere else at a restaurant, I didn't have to pay for that meal, now I can pay for this one, that becomes harder for us to take. And so this idea of equality means not just the money, but the sense that we're in this together. And I believe that giving here, and there is no prescribed percentage, you're saying, I'm here. I'm part of this. That I'm here for the blessing and I'm here for the burden. We are one. And so whatever that means for you, I want to ask you to consider it. And then the last part of this is that we should give as we have plenty. Ed Owens, the most successful fund manager ever, just retired in 2012, has lots of quotes about giving. I looked for his biography. I can't find it. I guess he doesn't report what he actually gives. But he has some good quotes about giving. He says this: our culture values the size of the gift, but God values the size of what we keep. You see, if Bill Gates gave away $1 billion, we're like, man, that's a lot of money. Except that he's got $40 billion, and so he's living on $39 billion. It's a lot of money, but it's not a generous gift. You see what? Let me bring it into real dollars. Let's say that you and I go out and we're hanging out, and I say, man, I'm hungry. You want some lunch? And you're like, yeah, definitely. And I say, cool. Well, I really love going to Red Lobster. Okay? And you're like, whoa, that's kind of rich for my blood. It's like, oh, it's cool, man. I got you. Okay, cool. And so we both go down there together, and I say, well, I brought $50, man. Like, wow, that's great. It's lunchtime at Red Lobster. You brought $50. I'm gonna eat like I haven't eaten for a month. It's like, yeah, but every time I come here, I really love to get the live Maine lobster, and I've got to get I got to get a $5 specialty drink, and I get dessert. And I'm sitting there going, well, that's gonna. No, it's cool. It's covered. You're covered. I figured it up with tip. It still leaves me $5 to get your lunch with. Wow, okay. I can get a cup of soup. Cool. Now here's the question. Are you at that moment thinking I'm generous? I didn't have to ask you to lunch. I didn't have to give you $5. You have no right to my $5, but I gave you 10% of my $50. Why am I not generous? You see, it's what we keep. It's what we hold on to that determines how generous we are, not how much we give. And that changes everything, doesn't it? So we give up Christ's wealth. We invest it And when we do, here's the great news is it multiplies. It grows. Here's what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. We're jumping past all that administrative stuff. In verse 6, he says this, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. There's two things I want to notice out of this passage. First of all, there is this idea of sowing and reaping. You know, when we talk about the tithe, everybody goes to Malachi 3 and they say, you know, hey, God says if you bring the tithe into the storehouse, God will return to you. There's nothing magical about 10%. It was what the Jews were told to do. Here's the principle. That when we give to God, he gives back. That when we sow, we will reap. That the percentage is not the question, it's the fact that we're getting from God. So in Galatians chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, it says this, nevertheless, the one who receives instruction in the word should share all good things with their instructor. Do not be deceived. I had to keep that one in there. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. You know what? You can keep it all in your wallet. You can. And no one's going to enforce anything on you. But God won't be mocked. Man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. You see, I can put money into stuff that will go to rot, or I can put money into stuff that will last forever. That when I invest in the Word of God going out into the world, guess what? I've just gone to an exchange and I've said, I want to turn this piece of paper into eternal wealth. That seems like a good deal to me, right? Sowing and reaping. The second principle is that the amount that you sow will determine the amount that you receive back. The measure that you use will be measured back. And so he says this in Luke 6:8, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. You know, so we talk about 10%. And I was just joking one day. I said, you know, I think to get more people at church, we ought to take an ad in the paper and we could say, we're running a 15% off special on tithing for this month only. To celebrate tax day, you can get all of the religious goods and services that we offer for only 8.5% of your gross income, whatever you think, you know. You think that would work? Probably not. But the thing is, if we take an 8.5% scoop and we give 8.5% to God, that God is going to say, give me that scoop, and he's going to dump his blessings in it. He's going to shake it, press it down, and give it to us running over. That there's a return on that. And then we say, wow, cool. Let me see. I got a 12% scoop around here somewhere, you know, and we give it and we hear it. And, oh yeah, I'm going to shake it and press it and flowing over. Here you go. The 10% isn't the thing. It's the heart, right? He will multiply it to bring a return. Now, let's talk a little more about what this return is, right? He says this, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the heart of your righteous. You know, we are not agrarian. Thanks to Monsanto, we don't understand the idea of multiple generation seeds. But if we did live in a culture that was agrarian, we would understand that if you take 1,000 seeds and you plant them in your field, you get back enough seeds from the grain so that, let's plant 1,000 wheat seeds in there, so we get back, let's say, 30,000 seeds, right? Of that, 10,000 of those, or 20,000 of those seeds, I'm going to grind and make bread. Now, if I want to eat next year, What am I going to do with the 10,000 seeds? I'm going to sow it back into the dirt. And so that's what he's saying here. It's just like you take your seeds, in this case money, you plant it. What you get back are seeds for next time. God does make people a difference financially. He does. It may come in a way you don't expect, but he does. And what Paul says is that will seed next time. We're not giving to get monetarily rich. We're giving because what we want is to be spiritually rich. What is spiritual riches? Every good work. That's the bread. Our souls will go hungry without doing good. Physically loving another person, our souls will be deprived and starve. He's saying you'll be rich in righteousness. And that's the kind of riches we want. That's the riches Jesus gave up for us. It says that he committed no sin, but he was made unrighteousness for us. And he has gone and invested in us so that we would become the righteousness of God, so that we would be stinking, filthy rich in good works, in good character, in a righteous life. Here's how it works. This is God's economy. You see, we live on the love standard. That all of God's goods and services are backed by divine agape love. That's the raw material. And that love, though, it has to be minted in an experience of opportunities and needs, resources meeting somebody else's needs. That we mint that gold into grace, the glad giving, the generosity. And what happens is that as that gold is minted into that and invested into the kingdom causes, diversity, what we turn up with is personal righteousness. The real services. Someone who's got a lot of gold, they still live like. See, real wealth is a quality of life. And what God is wanting to give us is a quality of life as our capacity for good works continues to expand as we give. Let me ask you a question. Are you spiritually stagnant today? Are you struggling to find vitality in your faith? Is it possible that's because you closed off the outflow? That this idea that this pipe is just full and it's expanding with God's blessings, we can't control the inflow. God is constantly pushing materials into the incoming side. But our side is this one. It's on the outflow. And as we close that aperture, the flow stops over here and stagnates. And we say, why is it I don't have my passion for God anymore? Because we traded it for financial security or for stuff. Why is God doing this? It's for his glory. The rest of 2 Corinthians chapter 9, or almost the rest, verses 11 through 14, it says this: you will be enriched in every way, so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. That I can turn paper and metal into thanksgiving to God. This service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. So that's the first thing is that as people receive this generosity, they thank God for it. But there's more than that, because God can drop money out of the sky on us. And we'd probably be just as thankful to him. But he doesn't, because there's more to it. It says this, because of the service by which you have proved yourself. This is a monetary term as well, talking about the authenticity of wealth, okay, of the gold. It says you proved yourself. Others praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ, and for your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you, of the surpassing grace God has given you. He's saying this, that God can drop a bunch of cash on anybody he wants to, and they'll be thankful. But God has done one more. He's taken people like me and you, selfish people like me and you, and he's turned our hearts toward grace. And that he wants to hold each of us up as a monument and says, here's what I can do with a bunch of selfish sinners. I can make them people loaded with grace and good works. It's like this story from the Bible. 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 7, it says, sometime later the brook dried up. This is Elijah, and there's a great famine in the land because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, Elijah. It says, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. By the way, God had been supernaturally providing for Elijah, and he decided to change the protocol. He says, okay, this is all dried up. I want you to go to Zarephath, to a king sitting on piles of money. No. I want you to go to the region, once in Zarephath, to the region of Sidon and stay there. Sidon is the land of the Gentiles. I have directed a widow there. Who? A householder? A king? A nobleman? A merchant? A widow there. I've directed her to supply you with food. So he went down to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called, hey, while you're going, bring me, please, a piece of bread. Sure is the Lord your God, not my God. Your God lives, she replied. I have only a handful of flour and a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me. When should she make that loaf? First. Make it for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. Not just her son, by the way. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. You see, this woman got so much more than food. She got a relationship with the living God through one of God's own people. She got to participate in the ministry of Elijah. This woman who was asked to give in faith became rich in righteousness. She was able to bless with the gifts Elijah gave to this woman. Will you give me? A part of it. Will we be rich in grace? Because the opportunity to give generously. Chapter 9, verse 15, by saying this, thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. How do you see giving? How do you see the money? Do you see that love in your heart and coupling with that financial resource to do something big in the world? That's a gift. I want to be rich in grace. I'm going to pray, and then we'll have a time. Jerry can meet you in the back if you'd like to be prayed for. Um, please don't think that I'm to just give here. I am asking you to give here. If you're blessed here, if you're sitting in this building, if you're glad you're not being rained on or getting a but if you're generous, guess what? There's enough for everyone. Let's pray.